Welcome to Costa del Cadwell Park. That is not Franco's Fireblade, that's my old ZX-10, and until the track's completely dry, there is no chance of that being Franco's Fireblade because I'm not taking that out of the van and risking it yet. The plan for today, if it dries out, is to just get the bike on circuit and get a few shakedown laps just to check that everything actually works. It works on the dyno, but whether it works on the circuit is a different matter. It should, but you never know until you've actually tried it. It would have been ideal if Franco had been here to ride his bike because it would have given us a chance to check foot pegs, handlebars, and just get him comfortable on the bikes for a couple of sessions. But when we checked the weather forecast yesterday, it was meant to be underwater here, so I told him not to come. And then the weather forecast got better. So now I've got the chore of riding his brand new Fireblade. It's a tough life. It's lunchtime now and I've had a couple of dry sessions on the ZX-10. The first session was patchy, the second session was basically bone dry, and it's not rained since. And hopefully won't in the next sort of 10 minutes or so. So the Fireblade is out the van. It is noise tested and apparently was 101 decibels. So I think the noise meter might be broken, but I'm going with it because I have a sticker that says I can go and ride it. I've also thrown some traction control settings at the ECU. Not entirely sure what they're going to do because I haven't read all of the kit manual yet for the electronic stuff. That is to come yet. So because it's on road tyres and because it's a bit cold and because it's not mine and because it's expensive, thought a little bit of traction control might not be a bad idea. But if I turn it into mode 1, there's no traction at all on that mode, but that's the most aggressive mode. So I maybe should have done it the other way round, but too late now. So that's it. I'm about to go out and see if that, and its 209 horsepower, feels significantly faster than that, and it's 175, 180-ish. I'm kind of hoping it does, otherwise we might have wasted our money. It's fast. It's definitely fast. The gearing's shorter than I'd normally run. I tend to run like 2nd to 5th round here, and that's using 2nd to 6th, so the gearing makes it feel fast. I did not rev it anywhere near its 15,000 RPM capability, and it's still fast. The first time you get it wound open down the start-finish straight, it is a missile. That is definite progress from that. I don't know whether I don't think it's got any more torque than my BMW than my Gen 3. I think the BMW's probably got a bit more grunt, a bit more shove lower down, but when that gets revving, that is quick. Right, the bike feels small when you're riding it because the fuel tank's quite small, quite compact, and so it's like there's not a lot to brace yourself against. So I know with Franco, I'm fairly sure we'll end up running a tank extension on it to give him a bit more support because I know he liked that on his 600, so I'm fairly sure he'll like that. The brakes, we're on standard discs still. Standard discs, standard pads, all we've done is take the ABS off and put normal brake lines on it. Those brakes are strong. I mean, I was not pulling them hard, but you didn't have to. There was like, just with a little bit of a pull on the lever, there's a lot of braking capability there. Throttle connection's nice, like it's smooth. No problem with that, it's really linear. There's no, like you almost don't notice the throttle. It's that good, which is what you want on a race bike. The traction control settings I put in, the light was basically on all the time, so I put it into mode 2, and that was a little bit better. But then I remembered the traction control settings are all on the assumption that we're on the slick, which is bigger rear. That's a 200, but it's only a 55, and the slick's a 60 or 65. So that's why the settings were on a lot, but I didn't feel the need to turn the traction control off. It just gave me a bit of a safety net. And obviously I wasn't pushing. That was poodle round a little bit, pin it in the straight line and be safe with it. And it's in one piece, and it all works, and it is going to be fast enough for Franco to learn on. Good little motorbike, turns well, does everything. One of those bikes that you know there's a lot of potential there. I know I wasn't going quickly on it, but it's got some go in it. So that's it, that can go back in the van. I'm going to spend the rest of the day in my old pair of slippers. The Datalogger, as with quite a lot of the other bits that turn up for race bikes, there's no instructions, because they assume you know what you're doing already, which is a fairly big assumption. So what I need to do is take this apart and just sort of work out where everything's going to go. First stage, I decided to fit the lander probe, so that goes straight into the air exhaust pipe, and I've just routed the cabling up here out the way. I'm not actually connecting it to anything yet, so the cable is literally just draped over there. Round to the front forks, I have the bike on a front paddock stand, on a headstock stand, so I can have the forks fully extended and make sure they're topped out, basically to make sure that we get the front suspension potentiometer long enough, because there's no point fitting it and then the first time Franco wheelies the bike it pops the sensor off. That would be no good at all. Now interestingly, these Öhlins forks actually have a thread already in them from the factory for fitting a Datalogger. So either Honda at some point might have thought they'd go full electronic with these and it would need a sensor on the outside, or they're just prepared for racing. Either way, makes my life considerably easier than drilling and tapping. So making sure I have enough extension there that the potentiometer isn't going to top out, easy for me to say. Basically the top of it wants to sit somewhere in this region. So what I'm going to do is just find the straightest run so that the pot sits in the straightest line possible, and then I'll decide exactly where to drill and tap this, and then I just need to put a little M4 thread sort of either around here or into this part of the yoke, and that will just keep the potentiometer basically tucked in there, and then when it goes up and down we'll see what the suspension's doing. So that's a little 4mm hole drilled and tapped, so the potentiometer is now solidly mounted, but what I'll probably do is put a slightly longer distance piece on that and move the brake line a little bit further away at some stage. While I'm here I've also fitted the front brake pressure sensor. We're not bothering with a rear brake pressure sensor at this stage. The advantage of this being lower than the reservoir is when I undo that cap, the fluid level automatically goes up, so basically it self-bleeds itself, so you just screw that in and it feels absolutely fine at the brake lever again. Little wipe around to get rid of any fluid, and then I can move on to the shock. I was kind of hoping that fitting the rear shock potentiometer was going to be fairly straightforward because the shock manufacturers put mounting points on. This isn't going quite as well as I hoped, so I've had to make a little standout piece here so that the potentiometer stands away from the spring, but I've got to have it quite close, otherwise it hits the swinging arm, because I've had the shock in and out several times to test that. But the other end is the problem. So at the moment, I've made a plate that comes off the linkage bolt that goes up to hold the bottom of the potentiometer on. And there is a problem with this of when the linkage is there is a measurement of this, it's sort of 55mm or whatever, but when this moves all the way round, of course it moves this across, and so it alters that length. So you're not actually going to get a true reading of what the suspension's doing, you're going to get a true reading of what the suspension's doing with some linkage movement, which isn't ideal at all. So what I need to really do is make a plate that will come off the bottom of here, straight up, out, and then angle over to here. But I've got to make it thin enough that it's not going to get in the way when I'm trying to do ride out adjustment changes, and I'd rather like it to come out of this side so it's out of the way a little bit more, but there's not much clearance behind here, and especially not much clearance to get the bolt in as well, that would have to hold it in place, and it's got to be stiff enough that this doesn't make it flex when it's moving relatively fast, because if it flexes we lose again some of the reading. So it is a bit of a faff, this. I was really hoping this was going to be nice and simple, but it's not. Oh well. Instead of scratching my head for hours on end, I decided to go home, sleep, and come back with a fresh set of eyes to look at the rear shocks. And I've also decided to look at the O-lins that we took out, because this also has potentiometer mounting points at the bottom of the shock and a couple at the top of the shock, but like the Batubo, they don't line up, so bracketry is needed. And I have an idea of how I'm going to do it. I just need that idea to grow in my mind a little bit, and so before I spend any more time faffing around with the rear shock, I'm going to actually put the wiring loom in the bike and connect everything else up. A little bit like when I fitted the main wiring loom, there is only really one place this can go because there are certain connectors in certain places, and the loom is made specifically to fit these Hondas. So the log has really got to go there, or some variation of very close to there. So I've trimmed a couple of the bits that sat in the under tray, like upright plastic bits that held ABS bits in place. So that now sits on there. There are some lumps of foam, so it doesn't actually touch the battery, and there's a bit of foam under there, so it's insulated from vibration and bits. And then the base for the seat does actually fit over it without crushing anything, so that's a bit of a bonus. It is becoming a little bit of a spider's web of wiring in here, but there's not a lot I can do about that because we've just got a lot of wiring. Right, the GPS sensor I'm putting there for now, and normally they can read through fiberglass, but they can't read through carbon. But being as we're not allowed carbon, that should be absolutely fine though, and it saves it being damaged quite as easily in a crash. There is a plug buried in that lot which just says HRC on it, so that's like the CAN information from the bike. Then I have the lander stuff in there, which I need to tuck some of the wiring out of the way for, the lander to CAN adapter, and then the rest of the wiring disappears along here and goes up here, but clearly needs to be a bit tidier into the bike. So my plan is going to be to run it underneath the airbox and out here with the rest of the wiring that goes to the dash and everything, so it'll sit down there. But that means I've got to take the airbox off again. It's not the end of the world, it's just yet more work. I think I'm making reasonable progress. I have the connector so I can offload the data up by the dashboard next to the connector for actually plugging into the Honda loom, so it makes sense to me to have those in the same place. The sensors are connected at the front. The wiring loom is running down that side of the bike. It's nice and neat. The reason you have to take the airbox off is because the connectors don't fit between like the gaps underneath the airbox, but the wiring, there is plenty of room for it, so that's running down there and is tucked down the side of the main wiring loom sort of channels in there. And I've got everything connected up in here except for the rear suspension pot mount, so I need to go back to the rear shock and see if I can work out a better system for fitting that. Right, after quite a lot of faffing around, I now have a sort of an adapter at the top, and at the other end of the potentiometer, an adapter at the bottom. Now I can't have the adapter coming straight off the shock bottom, because then it hits the shock linkage, so I then have to have the little sort of riser plate on it, and I'm hoping that doesn't flex when it's in action. At least it's going directly up and down. Right, I've tried it in the bike already, and we've got about 1 millimetre clearance to the swinging arm, which is well, pretty much perfect to be honest. So then the only thing I need to do now is actually fit it, hopefully for the final time, and actually connect up the sensor. The potentiometer brackets for the Batubo are fitted. I still need to do the ones for this O-lins for when we want to test that. Luckily, the lads over on the Honda hotline have sent me the drawings for the bracket they used that goes on the bottom of here, so it does make life a little bit easier because I can basically just copy their work. Having finally got the rear shock and the data logging stuff connected, I thought I'd better refit the fuel tank, make sure none of the wiring was in the way, and it isn't. There is gaps around everything, so nothing is caught up. I've tidied everything up. The logger is sat under there, but it's nice and sturdy, so that's braced in place. While I had the tank off, I made a little adapter and a T-piece and tied both breather lines into a single line and have put those to a breather bottle up the front here, and that does fit in the fairing. And then while I was doing all that, the postie has been and delivered the last bit of the data logging sort of jigsaw, I suppose, and I'd actually forgotten this was coming. This is our shift light module, so that now connects into the loom. Right, we're finally getting somewhere. The last job before I put the fairing on, though, is down here. So this is our Speedycom thumb brake, and it will fit around the fork leg, and then Franco can press that, and he'll have some brake. The only game I have at the moment is I have to do a bit of modifying to make our master cylinder fit the thumb brake. Because it's Superstock, we have to run the original master cylinder, even though this was originally designed for probably a Brembo or something. So, the bolt holes aren't exactly in the same location. These are threaded, and these are threaded, and this is a different size. So there is a little bit of work to be done, but I have seen photos of one of these fitted to a Fireblade in stock, so I know it can be done. I've just got to fathom out how. So I know the master cylinder can be fitted with basically an adapter plate fixed to here with the master cylinder then fixed to it, but I don't particularly like that because the centre point for this pivot is perfectly in line with the centre of our master cylinder. So if I space it out, then we're not going to be in the centre of the master cylinder anymore, so it's not going to be pushed as efficiently, and it means we might be off centre top to bottom as well on sort of this view. So I've decided to do something different. I've machined up, well, just cut a couple of little aluminium threaded inserts. I'm going to Loctite these into here, and then I'm going to cut them off, cut them flush, and basically just drill and tap myself some new holes. Easy as that. So having filled the holes and then chopped the filler bits off and re-drilled my holes and re-tapped them, I'm going to give it a bit of a trial fit. The other thing I've done slightly differently is I've used M5 bolts. Because if you can't snap an M6 bolt using your foot and a long lever, you're not going to be snapping M5 ones with your thumb, that's for sure. And it means I don't have to drill the thread out the master cylinder, which means if we want to put it back on the foot, we actually can do. It's all the little touches that I'm hoping will save us a load of hassle later. So I've got the master cylinder mounted to the actual thumb brake assembly bracket, so I know that fits, and I've taken a measurement off the edge of the bracket to the end of the master cylinder, so I can double check that this has clearance around the clock bracket, around the sort of air tube area, but I'm not going to go to the final extent of removing this and fitting the pin from the thumb brake, because I need to put this back on to here for now. And as long as I know we have clearance, I think we're going to be okay. So I did a bit of measuring, and it turns out I needed to trim some of the clock bracket away so that when I fit the master cylinder there will actually be room for it. Or at least I think there is with the measurements I've taken. I will have to move the rear brake reservoir bit, pressure sensor out of the way a little bit as well, but there is room for that just. And I've trial fit the fairing and everything fits in lock without the actual thumb bit hitting anything. So that's it. I can't actually, well, I'm not going to fit the reservoir master cylinder yet because I haven't got a brake line, so it's kind of pointless, and then I'd have to put it back at the back and bleed it up. So for now, what I'm going to do is take the bracket back off, put it in a box with some reservoir tubing and bits, and that can wait until we get to Spain. And then I just need to put the rest of it back together so that it can actually go to Spain. So that's the end of another surprisingly long day on Franco's Fireblade. Fitting the data logger I thought might take a couple of hours and basically took 2/3 of a day. Making the brackets for the shock and stuff like that was quite time consuming. I then decided to get ahead of the game and actually do a trial fit on the rear brake bits, so that has put me ahead of the game when we get to Spain, but it has sucked up pretty much the rest of the day I had today. The nice thing is we are basically ready for Spain. All we need to do now is fit a mudguard, learn how to use the data logger, learn how to use the electronic setting stuff a bit better. Oh, and I've still got to make the bracket for the Öhlins shock for the potentiometers. So maybe I've not quite finished the day after all. But thank you for watching, and join me again next time when hopefully this will be going round and round in circles somewhere sunny.